Okay, great. So this is Jeremy again. Thanks everybody for joining. It's 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have people in all sorts of different time zones on this training, so we'll move on. And there will be a recording of it, so if you have a colleague that wants to see part of it and they miss it, obviously we can bring that back up. So a couple of things about the webinar itself. It is a webinar, so typically we use like a WebEx or something, but we usually get enough people registered for these that we need to go into one that's a little larger. So it is a webinar, meaning that everyone is muted right now. My ask is that you will put your questions into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control, which is on the right-hand side. I will be watching that, and I will stop periodically to make sure that I address the questions. What I typically will do is read the question back, give the answer. Hopefully I have the answer. But give the answer and then type the answer as well so that everybody can see that. This is me, Jeremy Littlejohn. I'm one of the co-founders here at RISC. And that's my email. Feel free to reach me at any time. I also put our sales team email, so some of you may be working with our sales team on different opportunities or something like that, and so you want to understand how to reach them. That's it. And then we have multiple partners and customers. I should put that on here. This is not restricted to partners or customers. So just be aware of that. If you have a specific question, just generalize it, or feel free to ping me, and I'm happy to discuss it with you offline in more detail. Okay, so I want to say thank you to everyone again for joining, and we'll get started here. All right, we have an abbreviated agenda. If you've ever taken our success training, platform success training, there's a lot of stuff in here for that training, but I've shortened it today. We're trying to keep these pretty short to an hour. So I'm going to go for about 45 minutes or, somewhere around there, and leave lots of time for questions. I think at the end I can just open the audio up, so I'll try and do that if that makes it easier. We're going to talk about use cases first. The reason I always do that is because I think it's very helpful for you guys to think about how we've organized applications for different use cases. Because the way you look at an application in some respects is dictated a little bit by the use case you want to do. So I want to look at that. We'll talk about the grouping. That's what this training is on. And we'll talk about the use cases again after that and just kind of recap it. I'm not going to talk about how to deploy the appliance and collect the data and do those types of things. We have e-learning available for those at learning.riscnetworks.com. Of course, as I mentioned, you can feel free to put a question into the question section if you have a question about that. All right, so let me talk about use cases, and as I do that, I want to start very high level and also talk about our new product organization. So many of you may be familiar with our product called CloudScape. What we've done over the last 60 days here at RISC Networks is break out CloudScape essentially into different modules that people can purchase, because every person might need a different section of the value that CloudScape brings. And previously you had to buy all of it regardless of what you needed. And so we've tried to break that out a little bit so that you guys can get just what you need for your customer, or if you're a customer, just what you need for your solution. So the top two use cases, public and private cloud migration. Again, here we're using our foundation module. The foundation module is what we're going to talk about today, the grouping. All right, getting everything about my environment organized so that I can begin to run some additional analytics against it or questions. So if you want to do cloud migration, you would buy foundation and the migration module. But for example, if you wanted to do LAN and WAN segmentation, so if what you're trying to do is secure your environment and you want to put firewall rules in between your different applications, and you want to segment your application tiers like database tiers and web tiers, that doesn't require the migration module, the cloud migration module, right? You can just do foundation, and obviously it would be less expensive. Disaster recovery, you can kind of do either of those, or I'm sorry, not either of them. You can go with or without the migration module. It really depends on what you're DRing to. The migration module will allow you to size out public cloud stuff. So again, if you're looking at doing DR to the public cloud, it's usually useful to have that data. Makes your job a little bit easier. Security optimization, again, here you may just do foundation only. You don't need to know the cloud cost information in order to do your security optimization. And then we have a new module, performance and trending, which you can do for ongoing monitoring, alerting, etc., on top of foundation. You'll note here everything has foundation, right? Because foundation is the first thing that we want to do, which is help a customer organize around their application stack. We're doing that so that then they can ask these different questions. So when we talk to customers, they have all sorts of different stuff. They want to do ITSM and ITIL kind of initiatives. They want LAN segmentation. They need application portfolio management. What can I just get rid of, right? What am I not using anymore? I need disaster recovery. I need migration to cloud and or another data center, public or private, and obviously security. So all those things are fed by having a continually updated, accurate, and actionable picture of my environment. And that's what RISC Networks Foundation module gives you guys. It enables the concept of an answer engine, right? Once I've built that picture, which I'll show you in just a second, then I can start asking all sorts of different questions about it. So we really call this building a metadata layer. And the foundation module is what does this. It's what we're training on today. It takes all sorts of different asset information, servers, load balancer, storage, network, everything you see here, right? And what it's doing is organizing that for you so that it can then be dispositioned. You can take action against it. And this is one of the biggest challenges. So I've got to go from what's on the left, which is just a bunch of stuff talking, to what's on the right, which is an organized picture of my environment. Okay? And how much effort and time do I need to invest to do that? Once you've done that, right, what pops out of that we call application stacks. Now, an application stack, and we have some features coming in our Q1 release that will add to this, but an application stack and an application aren't necessarily the same thing. For example, I could have a 3-tier web app that's hosting as a structure, right? I have a load balancer, a web server, and a database. Let's just call it that. So I have these 3 devices, but those 3 devices are actually supporting 5 different applications. My CRM is on there, and I have something else on there, and I have a learning management suite on it, whatever it is. So we're going to get to the unit of those application stacks, that 3-tier stack, and we're going to put a container around that. Then when you look into the details, which I'll show you today, for something called an application instance, it will tell you, for example, what different applications we see deployed there. So you can add that additional color to that. Once you've got those application stacks identified, then you can begin to, again, ask different questions about that. Should I consider it for DR? How much bandwidth does it use? Or what's the security profile on it, etc. So again, all of these different questions can be layered on top of that as you get value out of that information. So think about the constantly updated picture of the environment, right? Continually getting updated. Every week there's new connectivity, there's new servers that come in the environment, there's new connections to external resources. All these things are happening on a regular basis. And so having this constantly updated foundational picture of your environment that you can go back to and start to ask questions, regardless of what those questions are, is really the power of our foundation module for you. All right, so let's talk about how we do that. Now, I'm going to actually show this to you first, and then we'll come back into the PowerPoint, so bear with me here. All right, so this is the demo we're going to use to train on today. It is an instantiation of a customer environment in our portal. What you can see here is we're essentially at the stage of an engagement where we have deployed a virtual appliance on-premise. We've done an asset discovery, so we know what devices exist within this environment, physical, virtual, so forth. And we can see some of that information if we want. Okay? But out of the gate with a discovery, what we call a discovery, this is what we'll be providing, asset information. At that point, we'd come over and start licensing devices. So when I license a device, what I'm doing is I'm telling the platform, go and continually collect data off of this device, okay? Every 5 minutes, we're going to go to that device. We're going to say, what's your CPU, memory, disk utilization? What's your connectivity? What processes are running? All of these types of data. And we're going to bring that information back to our platform. At that point, right, if you look at the dashboard, you won't see anything because most of the things that we do are derived around building out application stacks as an initial foundational stage. Let me show you a little bit of what the data looks like that you're bringing back at this point. So let's talk about the perf data first. So just so that you can see, right here you're bringing back, as I mentioned, CPU, memory, disk. So think your standard kind of network monitoring metrics. You're going to have access to all of that data, all right, over a time period, okay? In addition, as I mentioned, we're bringing back the connectivity data. So if we look in here at the connectivity, which I did, sorry, I should go slower, I apologize. Add intelligence, view individual workloads, okay? That will bring up this menu where I can select a workload, and I can say, hey, I want to see what that server's talking to. Now, some of these in this demo may not be talking to much. Let's see. So this server, not talking to that much other stuff, but we'll use it anyway as an example, okay? So this is all the communication that this server is doing. And you can see who it's talking to and on what processes or protocols it's using. Sometimes it's talking to something called an out of scope, which we'll talk about when we get to our RSGs. But this information, candidly, while it's nice to have as a reference, not very valuable. You know, if I have to go through all of this and figure out what is what, then that really doesn't move the needle for me, right? It's too much work. I mean, in some cases, the data here can be just totally, literally overwhelming. So we did, Turner Broadcasting is one of our customers. You may or may not have seen their case study on our website, but for them, we collected 1.5 billion rows of data for this. So that you can't process through that. The machines have to do it. We need some algorithms. We need some intelligence to do this. So that is why we offer our intelligent application grouping, right? So I'm going to come to Add Intelligence, go to All Applications. And here I have a button that says Build App Stack. So you'll note I don't have any application stacks. I have servers. Some are web, some are database. I don't have any stacks. So what I'm going to do is say Build Application Stack. Now, I selected an option there to do what's called Run Without the 95th, which I'm going to come back to as we go through this training today. But for now, I just kind of want to show you guys what that does. So that's going to take a minute or two to run. In the meantime, I'm going to look to see if we have any questions. Oh, no questions. Okay. So again, for those who joined late, please use the question panel if you have any. Feel free to type them in there, and I'll stop and get them addressed for you. So again, what's happening right now behind the scenes is that the platform is dipping into the data lake of connectivity. And it's trying to discern heuristically what different assets work together to form an application stack. And so in just a moment, when it's done, we'll take a brief look at it. And then what I'm going to do is go back to the PowerPoint and show you guys what's actually happening behind the scenes so that you'll have an idea about how to manipulate this algorithm, because there's a lot of ways for you guys to make changes on that. I'm operating sans my regular internet today, so you guys will have to bear with me here. Check again for questions. On this demo, this usually took about a minute, so let's see. Still going. Well, here, I can begin, you can begin to see applications filling in here on the left. Auto App 1, Auto App 2, Auto App 3, okay? You can also see things like RSG, Active Directory here, okay? RSG, Backup Exec, and so forth down here, okay? So again, these are different application stacks that our platform is putting in. All right, so it's done now. As you can see, the button's gone back to Build App Stack and it's completed. Okay, so now what I'm looking at is a bunch of application stacks on this page. Where I had nothing before, I have 45 stacks. None of which are confirmed, which we're going to talk about today. If I zoom out a level to my dashboard and look at my stack-to-stack view, I'll see that not only do I have the stacks, but that these stacks also have relationships to one another. So I can see how these stacks, right, are related to one another, who's consuming what, and so forth. And then I have ones that are not related. So again, we're going to go through this today. What I wanted to do was show you guys, right, that going from 0, essentially at this point I would have known nothing about my customer's environment. In fact, most of the places we go into, there's no contextual data whatsoever to work from, right? So it's 0 to something. And so we just went 0 to, we have application stacks. Now we're not done there, we're going to do some more work on that. But I wanted to show you guys what that was before we talk about how we do it. All right, let me just check, make sure there's no questions before I jump to the next section. Oh, got some. All right, is there an algorithm built into the platform that can list custom off-the-shelf apps versus custom apps? This is from Dennis. Yes. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how we do that, right? So you'll see why I answered the question that way. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the grouping process. There's two ways to do application mapping. Well, that might be more than two, but most of the time there's two that people are going to choose. Top down. In a lot of cases, this is agent-based. Basically, you're defining an app. You say, this is my CRM app. Here's the web server I go to. Now you go from there down, okay? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It works, but we call it spear fishing, right? I'm only looking for that fish. We choose to do it a different way, which is called bottom-up mapping, okay? Which is fishing with a net. Everything in the customer's environment should be dispositioned into something. And so some type of application stack, and you'll see we have special stacks that we do as we go through today. So what we want to do is collect everything and then try and make sense out of it. So within that, everything includes custom off-the-shelf or standard apps, right? Oops, went the wrong way. Hang on. All right, here's the problem. There's too much talking, right, to be able to get all that done. And this is our goal. All right, so here's how we do that. If I told you these are servers, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 servers in this diagram. And the lines you see between them are actually the communication between the servers, okay? Now, if I were a customer and I told you, well, I have 3 applications in here. A couple of notes on that. First of all, I would not be correct if I were the customer, and I'll show you that in a second, because what a customer, again, thinks is an application is not necessarily what it is. But if I say, where are they, there's really no way to know, right? We're going to have to look past just who talked to who. We're going to have to think about the types of communication that happen. So we use a concept called RISC Service Groups, RSGs. If you remember when I showed you the click the button and it generated the groups, there was an RSG-Active Directory, okay, and an RSG-Backup Exec, okay. So a RISC service group is the first thing that we're going to look to define. Now, you might see those called SOAs in some of our documentation. So I list them both here. They mean the same thing to us, service-oriented architecture, but we're looking for what we call a RISC service group. So what's an example? Active Directory, antivirus. These are two good examples of RISC service groups. So what does that mean? When I use this analogy when I do my live trainings, it's a little bit easier than on the webinar. But if I were Google and I was tracking everywhere you went, which they are, then what I would want to know is if any two people on this webinar were friends, let's say. Well, how would I tell that? If you all went to the football stadium, would that mean you were friends? What if you all went to the DMV? Does that mean that you're friends? And so the short answer is, you guys are intuitively guessing already, right? Is no, that's not the case. Those are shared services. Those are things that we use or go to and consume, but they don't tie us together as individuals. Now, if you're both at somebody's house on a Saturday afternoon, well, that's different, okay? So we want to look at the types of this communication. So Active Directory, antivirus, these are shared services. So the first thing we're going to do is put a box around any RSG that we have. Logical box. Once we put that logical box in there, we use a feature that you probably, the best permutation of it that you may or may not know about is LinkedIn, right? So if, on LinkedIn, I can make a choice about whether you can see my connections or not, right? Can you peer through me or not? And so if I want you to share my network, I can. If I don't, I can block you. So in our algorithm, what we do is we say, well, once I put a box around this, you cannot peer through it. It becomes opaque. Okay? So now if I came back to you and I said, where are my 3 applications? It's pretty obvious. Now I've left this one out to the right here just a second. We'll come back to it, so bear with me here. So going back to our customer, he said, I have 3 apps. They don't have 3 apps, they have 5 apps. Right? They have the 3 auto apps, and then they have an antivirus and an Active Directory. Those are applications or services in the environment. They are services that they're going to need if they migrate to cloud or go to another data center or do a DR. Hey, I did DR, but there's no Active Directory for the services to authenticate on the server when it comes up. No good. Okay? So the question originally there was, do we have an algorithm that will find both? And so the answer is yes. Right? So we're not looking at what this app is. We're not pattern matching. Pattern matching is when you get into a challenge about, well, I don't have a pattern that matches X, so I can't find it. So instead, what we do is we're looking for specific RSGs, and then everything else we're doing heuristically. So those custom apps and everything else will come in. All right, so hold on one second. Map appears to, I'm looking at the questions here, so from Ron here. Map appears to show critical and non-critical apps overlapping. How does this allow for separate stack moves? I'm not, Ron, I'm not sure about that. Maybe if you don't mind kind of rewording that, I'd be happy to answer it. But let me just talk about critical and non-critical. Critical and non-critical have to do with links. It has to do with a judgment about the communication itself. And we have on our website, if you come to our documentation, see if I can do this. Bear with me. So a lot of what I'm going through today, right, is in this building application stack section, and here as a side note. But I believe we put it, oh, here it's in a glossary, that's right. So if you go into the glossary, you can learn about the application stacks and what is critical and what is not. So we have a section in here. I have to find it. Bear with me. Here we go. Review for critical dependencies. Well, I just had it. Here we go. Sorry, guys. Well, it's in here somewhere. I'm sorry I can't find it off the top of my head, but I'll get it to you. Here we go. Critical, non-critical. There we go. Woo! So a critical, you should not think about, you should assume everything is critical except what we mark as non-critical. Okay, so that's the first thing. Everything is going to default to being critical. What's non-critical is stuff like OS background traffic, so Windows chatter, right? Windows system traffic, the LSAS traffic, or something like that. It's not that we don't see it and think that it's, you know, and show it to you, but we're going to say, hey, that's not critical. As far as critical would mean these two things should be in the same application stack. Critical means I'm going to glue them together in an application stack. Non-critical means I see them communicating, but I'm not willing to connect them on that. Okay? So that's critical, and I'm going to put this link in here versus non-critical. Okay. All right. Next question for Dennis. Can you type in a URL and do a URL spiral discovery from a top-down approach, so you can discover the load balancer, web server software, app server, LDAP, and database server? So, no, we don't approach it that way, right? We're still going to find, what you're going to find in ours is a load balancer, web server, app server, and a database server in a stack. That's going to be an application stack. Then it's going to have a connection to the LDAP server. And the LDAP server is going to be its own stack because that's a service, right? So that when you think about that application, you're thinking about the services it needs if it goes somewhere else, for example. The other thing is that same LDAP server is used by 5 different applications. So we need to be able to see that visually and say, well, how many things depend on this LDAP server or cluster? So that's the way ours is going to do it. I don't know how to type that in, Dennis. So I'm not going to answer it, Dennis, so don't take offense. I'm just going to assume that I got it there, right? Will we get the deck, or I need screenshots using the given option on every site? No. You'll get a recording. I'm recording this webinar, so you'll be able to come back and get the recording, right? And the deck. That's fine. You will get the deck and recording. There we go. All right, and Vishant also has, why is the last app not Auto F4? Okay, great, yes. Good question from the PowerPoint. So let's go back to that. All right, that's a very good question, Vishant. Why is this guy not in his own stack or anything else? Well, it's to demonstrate a stack that we do that's special, one of our special groups. The blue line here is what the customer gave you as a scope, or what if you're the customer on the phone, what you've defined as the scope. All right, so I'll give you an example. We deal with this every day. Customer comes in, says, hey, I've got, I need to shut down this data center, and I need to move everything to somewhere else. Or, okay, great. So what is the scope of what they want to look at? Well, it's just this data center. Okay, are you certain that nothing in this data center is consuming something outside of this data center? Yes. Okay, so then we run, and what we find is this. That connection out there, is, if it's either Oracle, Microsoft SQL, MongoDB, MySQL, NFS, or iSCSI, so storage or database, primarily is what we're looking at, then we're going to call that individual server out or group of servers and say, hey, that's what we call a RISC out-of-scope service, meaning there's something critical that your in-scope devices are consuming, but you're not including it in the scope. So if you've ever had anyone ask you, well, tell me something I don't know, this is something you don't know, right? They weren't aware of that scope. And so you guys and the customer have an option, right? I expand my scope, I go and grab that. Or in some cases, it may just be I need to license it. So sometimes it's in the IP scope that you're looking at within our platform, but they just didn't license it. And so they'll want to go back and license it. Okay. Now, this is our rationalization process. So we're going to go back to the platform in just a second as we continue the training here. Well, once I've got my groups built, that's the algorithm just did it, I'm not done. Right? Our platform will get you guys 90% of the way there. That's our target, 90 to 95%. There's still stuff that you're going to do that's specific to your customer, right? Or if you're the customer, specific to your environment. I'll give you an example. It's one I use all the time. There's a CRM app. But the CRM application doesn't have good reporting. And so the executives at the company have invested in, let's say, MicroStrategy, because they like to use the MicroStrategy reporting against the CRM database. Now, when we do our approach to this, we're going to actually put that MicroStrategy server, cluster, whatever it is, into the application stack with the CRM. We see them hitting the same database. We say these two things together. As you guys look at that, you may come along and say, actually, we don't view MicroStrategy as part of this stack. It has a critical dependency on this stack, but it's a different stack. It's its own stack. And so you're going to move that out, create your own stack, and move that into there. And so there's adjustments like that that you will make as you think about how the customer organizes. And again, a lot of that is use case specific. So if you're thinking about migration as a use case, well, you might want to think about it within that stack. If you're going to move one stack at a time, because if you separate the MicroStrategy from the CRM and the executives can't get their reporting, there's going to be trouble, right? So that way you guys can see, and of course you can augment that intelligence to make it fit. When we have a problem, which we do, when we have a problem with our algorithm, it is what we call the one group problem. So we're going to show you some of that today. I'm going to go through that, right? The one group problem for us is when we don't find, for example, an RSG. Or there's an RSG that we don't have a pattern for. So the RSGs we do pattern matches for. It's everything else that we don't do a pattern for. So the RSGs we are patterning for. The first time we ran an engagement where the customer had Octopus, which if any of you guys are familiar, is kind of this DevOps package distribution hybrid platform. And if you want to guess why it's called Octopus, you can do that, but it's got its tentacles everywhere. It's everywhere, right? And so that, if we don't have that as an RSG, what can wind up happening is it can link together a bunch of different application stacks, okay? So what I'm going to do is show you today how to deal with that. It won't happen on every stack or in every engagement, but every once in a while it will, so we'll go through a little bit of that. There's two techniques. There's the 95th group, which we'll talk about, and then we call the scalpel approach, or custom SOAs and RSGs, which we'll do. Okay, so I'm going to switch back. Let me just check, make sure no new questions, and we'll switch back over. All right. All right, so here we are back in our training demo. Notice now, since I ran the grouping, right, I have my stack to stack up here, I have my stacks here. And I've also started to populate other information like issues, right, because the issues are all grouped by application stack. So they're not going to be there until we look at the stack. All right, so let's work through these stacks. Let's go through our process of understanding what's in the application stack. So I can go to view individual application stack. I can enter this a couple different ways. In fact, let's go to all applications. So the first thing we want to do is take some noise out. So what kind of noise is there? Well, we're going to put in any RSG that we run, even if it has 0 servers in it. The reason we do this today is so that you guys know we looked for it. We looked for all these different things, okay? And we didn't find them. Now, I also want you to know that I'm running this on demo data, right? It's specifically been augmented to not work. So one of the things we're going to look for today and find is a link server, even though this link group is empty, okay? So it wouldn't happen in real world, but it's how I can use to show you guys some techniques on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just kind of get rid of all of these zeros. All right, so I'm going to take these and remove them. It just kind of reduces the amount of stuff we need to deal with. Right? A couple of different things you can do. I can filter to 0. All right. Hello. There we go. Now here you can see out of scope services is empty, but again, if there were some critical components that the in-scope devices and stacks were consuming, but that were out of scope, that would be populated. And the very first thing you would want to do is go and resolve that. What do we mean by resolve? We mean go through the list of devices that are in it and either license them, bring them in scope and license them, or essentially get a sign off from the customer that they're not important. Okay, so now I've got all of my stacks here, okay? And I can see right away that some of these make total sense. Here's an 8-server stack, all right? It's a straight up, probably Windows-based application stack. We'll look at it in a second and see. These servers make it up. I can see that it's not confirmed yet. It's the app owner isn't set, the department isn't set, and the description is just an auto dependency based stack. Okay. I also have other stacks down here, a couple that I'll talk about very briefly for you that are special groups. So let me make this bigger. Anywhere where you see these arrows, you can expand or contract the screen. Okay. All right. So isolated devices. Isolated devices are any servers or devices, I guess I should say, that we see that aren't communicating critically with any other peer device. So what do we mean by that? Let's take this. A single SharePoint server, on box, MS SQL, I'm a single server. I'm it. Everything I run is on me. Now I talk to Active Directory, so I talk into an RSG, right? I communicate over here to this RSG, but I don't communicate to any other kind of peer servers, any servers that aren't in an RSG. In that case, I will go into the group called isolated devices. So you think of isolated devices as your single server application stacks. It's also a great place to find opportunities to get rid of servers. So again, going back to Turner Broadcasting, one of our customers, they shut down, when they first ran our platform, they had about 16,000 servers that we were looking at. And they had, I think they had 1,900 servers in isolated devices. So they came back to us and said, oh, we've got some problem. All these devices are in isolated. So we said, no, I mean, they're there because of this behavior. They wound up shutting down 1,500 devices that were in isolated, because what the platform was telling them was, nobody's connecting to this. It's not communicating to anything else. It's basically booting up, logging its services in to Active Directory, and sitting there. And so they were easily able to save tons of money on their IT runtime costs and things like that with using isolated devices. So don't be afraid of it. It's not a bad thing. Next group is no connectivity. So this means we don't have any connectivity. We're not showing anything. They might be licensed, but for whatever reason, we never saw it talking to anyone or anyone talking to it. Again, this is demo data. You probably wouldn't see that high of a number in a regular engagement of this size. Now, if you do an engagement with 10,000 servers, yeah, you might see 39 node connectivity. So you can click on that and figure out what those are. Okay? And then the rest of these are RSG, so Exchange, network devices, routers and switches. They go into the network devices, RSG, Citrix, Active Directory, and so forth. Okay. All right. So let's start working through a couple of these app stacks, because what we need to do, right, is as a customer or as a partner who's using a platform, is I need to get from whatever we're at with this stack to a name and so forth. Okay. So let's just begin. Let's see. I reset my demo, so I don't know what got reset. Okay, so this is this big stack. That's 22 servers, right? So the first thing I want to do is look at this as a user of the platform and determine if I feel like this is a complete stack or not. Okay. Accurate, again, we don't use the word accurate, even though the platform is accurate. What we're using is the concept of completeness. So how complete is a stack? So if you look here, for example, what you'll find is that up here, part of this application stack is actually a Windows workstation. Okay. Now, that's because the customer licensed it. We wouldn't collect it on it. We don't differentiate or discriminate against it because it's a workstation. It could be part of the stack. It could be doing a cron job that the customer set up or something. Not that we are all recommending that, but that might be what's happening. And so we're going to go on and bring that in. So there's some of this where you'll want to review this with the customer and understand, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Does this make sense to you, right? And again, you can blow this visualization up and work with them on it. Okay? But one of the first things people often ask us about is, hey, let's assume I'm just going to stay with this because, as we all like to say, it is what it is, right? As far as this is the look of the app for right now. What I want to do is give it a name. So down here on the left, you have all the servers listed that are in the stack. There are 4 tags that we do as a platform by default. Okay, those tags are RScore, right? Rehost, replatform, etc. If you're doing the migration module. Tier, which we do no matter what, so that would be web or database tier or middleware, right? Those types of things. Application instance. In this case, we have internal portal. That is the actual application instance that's deployed onto this web server. Okay, so if I view the device details and I drill into what it's doing, it will show me those instances. Okay, now they don't have this, again, this is demo data, so it's not here, but that's what's going to show up for you guys. Is you're going to have the application instance and you're going to have the database instance if we saw a database in it. Okay, so in many cases, that's going to be sufficient to give this app a name and begin the process of rationalizing that with the customer, which is, hey, I need you to validate this app. I need you to look at what's in it. Here's what we're seeing. If the customer says, well, I don't understand why that workstation is in there. What's it doing? Well, I can click on these links and see what it's communicating. Okay. It's got some terminal services, right, and things like that. So the customer may come back to you and say, no, that's not actually part of the app. Or you guys may, if you're the customer, you may look at it and you say, I understand why that's there, but that's my management workstation. And I shouldn't have licensed it, but I did, and whatever, I want it out. Okay, well, I'm going to take this out. So I'm going to move this device, right? So I right-click, and I say, hey, edit stack membership. I'm going to move it, and I'm going to say, I want to move it to a stack called workstations. Now, what you're going to notice here is that once I did that, something happened. My application stack broke, so to speak, right? So this is now up here. So this is likely its own stack, right? Now it's I can either manually move it out, like I did. I can filter over here and select multiple of the devices and move them all and add a sec membership. Or I could go back and rerun my algorithm now that I've pulled the workstations out and put them in their own stack. So workstation, just an example, again, unless they license the workstation or unless you license the workstation, that's not going to happen to you. But if you do, that's an example of how you can pull that out of there. Okay? All right, let me check for questions. Okay, here we go. All right, so question from Dennis. Those stack names look like software installed on servers and not specifically applications like HR, finance, payroll, marketing, etc. Is that due to being a demo, or is this RISC definition of application? No, that's partially due to being a demo, but it's also due to however the customer deployed it. So the customer can deploy Great Plains, but call it accounting. Well, we don't know. We're going to call it Great Plains. If that's what they deployed, like that's the instance that's deployed of the application, we're going to call it Great Plains, not accounting. So you guys are then going to have to work with the customer, or the customer is going to have to change that to whatever they call accounting. Okay. So it's a little of both. What about RSG Citrix? Vishrant, you want to give me a little bit? If you'll give me a little bit more there, I'd be happy to answer it. But RSG Citrix is looking for Citrix clusters, right? Metaframe clusters, essentially. I don't know if that's what you're asking, Vishrant, but if you want to put a little more in there, I'll be happy to. So for the segmentation use case, and again, I'm just stopping here to answer some questions. For the segmentation use case, I'd be using Foundation. Our network utilization metrics included with Foundation licensing. Not bandwidth, so that's going to require flow licensing. It's not an additional module, but it's an additional license you'll need to add. So you can add flow licensing and get rate information, bandwidth, latency, etc. So I'm going to put utilization. All right, so Dennis asks, are the application stack names in column 1, I think you were back on the other page, auto-generated by RISC. Everything you saw when I pushed that button was auto-generated. All right, so does that mean if the engagement is to migrate to cloud, all the isolated devices good candidate for straightaway migrations without any validation of dependencies? Or we are still liable to check the dependent stacks option? Yeah, I would still check the dependent stack. I would still check the dependent stacks just because you need to know what, for example, what Active Directory domain at the customer do they talk to. So what he's talking about briefly here for everyone who doesn't know is if I slide this out, I can say, show me the dependent stack. So show me all the things that the internal portal relies on. Well, it relies on workstations, right? Because we just pulled that workstation out of it. So that's going to be there. And these two Active Directory domains. Okay, fine. So I would still do that for isolated, yes. How is not connected different from isolated? Scott's asking. Okay, no connectivity means no records. So no, where isolated means no critical traffic to non-RSG groups. Okay. So basically, no connectivity means literally I don't have an entry in the database for that host talking to any other host. Okay. Isolated is more a judgment about, yeah, we saw some connectivity, but we didn't deem any of the connectivity to be critical unless it was already talking to an RSG. So again, a server that's consumed by Citrix, that might go into isolated, and it might be critical traffic to Citrix, but it's not talking to another server next to it critically. That's why it's in isolated. Okay. All right. So does RISC track how many user connections and if the app is latency sensitive, or percent of bandwidth between servers inside a stack. So the short answer, Dennis, is yes to all of those, although I want to just be clear, if you add the flow, right, we'll track latency and bandwidth for all of the connections, and then you can aggregate those however you want at the app level, which I'll show you in a second. But the thing I want to be clear on is that we can't tell you if the app is latency sensitive. What I can tell you is what is the latency to the app today. So, or between the web server and the database might be 5 milliseconds of latency. I can quantify that for you. If you take that to 15, I can't quantify for you whether that will be a problem or not, right? So that's something you guys would have to do, but you would know what it is today. All right, you mentioned, I'm sorry guys, just getting through here. You mentioned about RISC groups. So what exactly does that mean for those servers in order to migrate it to cloud? Do we need to check dependencies for RISC Citrix nodes with other stacks? Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to say across the board that you wouldn't ever migrate an RSG to the cloud, but RSGs are more shared services. Again, you just need to have that in the cloud. So antivirus, do not migrate your antivirus to the cloud, right? Buy something there that's antivirus in the cloud, for example, or just connect to your antivirus on premise if you want across your direct connect or whatever you're doing, but it's not about like, oh, I'm going to save money migrating my antivirus to the cloud. Again, not that you couldn't do that, but typically the RSGs are not treated that way. However, if you're thinking about migrating an app to the cloud and you want to see, well, I click on Citrix and I want to understand the Citrix users consume that app, that is absolutely a valid and important thing to do, right? So if I come over here and I say, well, anything that Citrix consumes, for example, by clicking on it, I can see what it's consuming. So anything that it consumes, let's just say for the sake of argument, I've decided I don't want to deal with right now because the Citrix admin is going to be all on me about latency and all this other stuff, and I just can't deal with it. All right, so fine. Then here are all these other stacks that you could attack, right, as far as migration or disposition, that do not connect to Citrix. Okay? So I don't know if that helps. Okay, I got more coming in. I'm going to not type the answer, Vishrant, to that last one there. Hopefully that was okay. It was a little long to type. But is there a way to show in the visualization of the app that more than one web server is used by more than one website URL? Yes. So again, those are going to be in the, that will be in the, hang with me, guys. In the, maybe I don't have it on this one. Let me find where I've got it. Bear with me. All right, so that will be in the application instance. All right, so these are in here already, but this would be, you would see, for example, blog site and this site and that site. There's 3 sites in there on this server, right? Deployed onto this server. So yes, is the short answer. And you're going to look for the application instance tag. And that's how you're going to see that. The other way to see that, depending on which, in the foundation module, that's the way to see that. If you are running, for example, the cloud module for CloudScape, then or the migration module, you can go to what's called application classification quickly. And you can see, there's a lot of tags in my demo here. So you can go to application instance. And this would show you any place where you have multiple instances within a stack, right? So you would see, hey, AutoApp 4 has link and this and this. So they would all be in there, okay? So you would see those. All right, so how does it handle multiple DB in a single server? Does it list what app is connected to what DB? It does. Let me come back to that one, Diego. I'm going to show you that in just a second, okay? All right, can a Citrix stack, so John, can a Citrix stack be broken down into individually published applications, more specifically, where you have a client published on Citrix to a database, i.e. no application server. Client published on Citrix. John, I'm going to ask you to come with, get with me offline on that one. We have 5 minutes, and I want to get through one other thing. So sorry guys, I didn't allot enough time clearly for this, but I'm reading the other one here from Vishwant. So a couple of questions around Citrix. Happy to go through it with you guys and address those, but probably if you guys could reach out to me, Diego and Vishwant, offline, I'd be more than happy to get with you guys specifically around the Citrix piece. Okay. All right. So I want to move back quickly to the single app problem, because you will face that from time to time, and I want to just show you some tools for it. Okay? So I have, again, very specifically left in an auto app group that is too large. It has 174 servers in it. Okay. So, and again, we did this on purpose for the training here, right? So as I look at this, it's just a jumbled mess, right? So what I need to do is figure out how to deal with it. Now, I can deal with it algorithmically. The way to deal with it algorithmically is to run our algorithm the first time with the 95th group, what's called the 95th group. What the 95th group does is it takes all the top 5% or the 95th percentile of connected devices in my environment, and it puts them in a special group called the RISC 95th highly connected group. Okay. And by doing that, and then not allowing things to connect through that, it essentially creates an RSG for that group. It breaks out all of this other connectivity in the smaller groups, okay? So if you get into a situation where you have a giant group and what you're trying to do is peel out, you know there's an RSG. What that means is there's an RSG in here. We just didn't have a pattern for it. So use the 95th group. That will bring that into a more workable set, and then you can figure out what that is. In this case, what we're dealing with is, I'm going to show you kind of the scalpel method, right, and just some stuff. So here, what I want to do is I want to find out what my most connected hosts are within here. So I can start sliding this bar. I don't know how well you guys can see that on the GoToWebinar, but as I slide this over, I'm seeing which devices have the most connectivity, okay, as in terms of other hosts that they're connected to. Right, and what I'm very quickly able to see here is like, oh, okay, just right here in the middle of this thing, I've got 3 domain controllers. Now, again, these would typically go into an AD group, but for the purposes of the demo, I left them in here. So if I right-click on this host, I can say View Device Details, and I'm going to find out that it's running System Center Configuration Manager and Operations Manager, right, and all these things that should have gone right into a different stack, but for the demo didn't. So I've got a couple of ways that I can deal with this, right? I can, as we were showing before, right-click this host and edit its stack membership and move it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually do I'm going to show you guys some other tools that you can use. So I'm going to come over here to Add Intelligence. I'm going to search, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to see Active Directory. Here's all my servers that are running some type of Active Directory. Okay? And I can filter here on the stack name. I was dealing with AutoApp 04, so I'm just going to filter 04. Here we are. There's 5 of them. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to move these into a different stack. These should have all gone into an AD. So I'm going to say, hey, you guys should go into AD1. As a side note, we noticed those workstations were in there before. So I'm going to come over here to my advanced rules just to show you a way to do this. And I'm going to say, hey, I want to add a rule that I'm going to say the Windows OS version contains 7. Let's just say, I don't know what we had in there, so I don't know if it's Windows 7 or not. So let's see. There we go. So there's a bunch of Windows 2007. You can see the device type is Windows Workstation. Again, I don't want anything that's in AutoApp 4. That's the group I'm trying to break up. So I'm going to take all of these out, and I'm going to put them in my workstation stack, right? Because I already had that one done. So again, each you know, when you go to a customer, what you're going to try and do here is use the visualization initially. If you feel like you have some challenge around one stack that's too big, find out where your most connected devices are. I'm just giving you an example of how to use the tooling to do it, right? And then you can search or use the slider here in the visualization to understand where you want to make some changes. Whoa. I don't know what happened to my visualization. There we go. Hello. All right, so what you'll notice now, since I pulled that stuff out, look at this over here, all right? So since I pulled out those domain controllers and the workstations, I have an application stack that's formed over here. I have an application stack here. I have a 2-server application stack here and a 2-server application stack here. So very simple changes. Again, you won't have to do this for Active Directory or anything like that. But if you get in and there's a large group, it usually means there's some it could be a certain type of backup application they have that we don't have an RSG for, or it could be a monitoring app that it's a open source monitoring app that we just haven't seen before, and so it's touching everything and linking everything together. So you can use your visualization tools to zero in on what hosts are doing the most communication, and then you can take an action on those hosts to break your group up. Now, in order to get all those things, the last thing I'll show you guys, in order to get all those things back out into their own stack, what we need to do is we need to confirm all of these. So I'm going to confirm that one, right? And I'm going to confirm internal portal that we did. I'm going to confirm the workstations, right? So those are the ones we created. I'm just confirming them. Now when I build my application stacks again, and you can see there's my choice of the 95th or not, you know, instead of having 9, I'm going to have more than 9. Let's just put it that way. So I'm going to run without the 95th. I don't know exactly what, but it's going to dip into that big group that the visualization had all those pods and break that out into the stacks. Okay. Okay. So real quickly, I just want, while that's running, well, actually, let me just check questions. So I guess. Multiple DB, all right, that was a Citrix. Is there a way to show which of those green lines are source versus destination? Yes, all of our directionality is normalized. So basically, we have a fairly advanced algorithm for making sure that we have the source and dest correct for direction. So if it says that's the source and that's the dest, that's what that means, okay? And then the other question Dennis had was, does it capture UDP traffic? Yes, with flow, and yes, with flow. Right? It would even capture IPX traffic if you're living in that universe, which hopefully you're not. Okay, so I want to just show quickly, while that's going on, I'll actually switch over to the remit. So the question was, how does it deal with shared databases, okay? So with a shared database, we create something called an auto schema. If you do our database connectivity module, right, which is what you would need to do, we have a module that you don't have to pay for. I say it's a module. It's a credential. So if you go onto the credentials on the appliance and you give us a database credential, we will actually log into the database credentials, and we will see any time where there's a database schema that's linked to multiple stacks, okay? And we'll deal with that. And you can actually, at that point, come in, for example, to the database summary report. So in here, we'll say, hey, there's all these databases. You gave us credentials to these 4 MySQL databases. So we track them. We know what they're running. And then basically, we'll come down here and say, hey, this database server, right, web01db, it has a schema called WordPress on it, okay? And WordPress is associated to this application stack, all right? So you can see that within here, and you can know which ones are connected to which one. So you can get all the way to this level. You can also tell if we ever saw flows for it or anything like that, because sometimes there's a connection defined, but there's no traffic to it, right? So we want to just let you know that. But yes, so you can see what all of those different connected stacks are to each database schema. So if WebDB had a different schema here, this is the blank schema. So it's connecting here without a schema and here with a schema. So if it had another schema, WordPress 2, and a different stack were on it, it would show that. Okay. So I don't know if that answers the question. So I've got something from Vishrant here. These mini reports not actually available in the actual environment. Is all work in progress. No, all of these reports are available in our environment. If you run the database module, this report appears. If you do the database creds, this report appears. If you don't do the database creds, it doesn't appear because there's nothing to populate in it. So Vishrant, if you're running the database piece and you're not seeing this, then let us know. But we're not gonna. We just don't put it there unless people run it. Okay, I'm over 5 minutes on time, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I appreciate everyone joining today. We got through most of the stuff. Sorry, I probably sit too long in the beginning on the PowerPoint. But I'll tell you what, we have another one of these in a couple of weeks. I'll move much faster, so please feel free to join that one as well. I'll send out the GoToWebinar recording of it, and I believe everyone has my contact information. I'll put it up one more time. So if you were asking questions and I didn't get a chance to get to them, or the Citrix specific stuff, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to follow up and get you an answer. But thank you all again. If you have any feedback for me too on this, that would be great. So whether it was good or bad, not in the weeds enough, too in the weeds, all of that would be useful for me as I think about how to do these better for you guys. Okay? All right, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.